Well, hello everyone and welcome back to our series of videos on the topic of respiration. Now, if you're having a bad day and you find it hard to find something to be thankful for, here's something. The fact that you're breathing well and that your respiratory system's working, be grateful. You see, many things can go wrong with our breathing system. And here you see something on someone's neck. Want to guess what this device is? No, it is not some sort of collar, and neither is it some sort of necklace. This is a device which helps this man breathe. And it has been inserted, this tube has been inserted into his windpipe. A procedure has been carried out called tracheotomy, where his windpipe, or the trachea as we will be learning, the trachea, has been cut open and a tube inserted to help him breathe, possibly because there's some sort of obstruction in his airways. So, feeling grateful now? Anyway, for the rest of this video, we'll be covering the parts of our gas exchange system. We'll be covering the pathway of air from outside of us into our lungs. And as we go along, we also see how each part of our gas exchange system is adapted for its specific function. So these are the textbook pages. Just a quick thing before we carry on. Remember at the start of our entire chapter of respiration that I showed you this picture? This picture shows the difference between gas exchange and cellular respiration. Now, cellular respiration is what we've been looking at in the previous videos. Aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. It's a process which takes place inside our cells, where cells use glucose to produce energy. Now, from this video onwards, we're going to leave cellular respiration at one side, and we're going to turn our attention to gas exchange. So we're going to turn our attention to how gases move from outside our body, into our lungs, and what happens to those gases there. Alright, so this is what our attention will be focused on for the rest of this chapter. Alright, so let's get started. How does air enter your lungs? Now here's a picture, a diagram showing the entire gas exchange system. We're going to learn how to label the different parts of this system, to describe their functions, and to describe how they're adapted for their functions. So here are the different parts of your gas exchange system, and we're going to go through them one at a time, starting with the nasal passage. So air first enters your body into your nostrils and into your nasal passage. Now, however, you'll tell me, Mr. Lim, but there's another way that we can breathe, and that's through our mouth, right? See, if I breathe through my mouth, actually the air eventually goes into the same place. So what's the point of having a nasal passage when I can breathe through my mouth? So there's a function for the nasal passage. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there, right? So, normally people would say it's better to breathe through your nose, right, through the nasal passages than your mouth. Why is that? We'll think about it for a while. And the reason is that your nasal passages contain structures which your mouth does not contain. If you don't know what I mean, why don't you take a mirror and look up your nostrils and inspect and see what you can find there. You should see something that looks like this. Ta-da! Your nostrils. And what do you see? You notice that there is first nasal hair and sometimes mucus, right? And the nasal passage contains mucus, so there's a mucus layer, and contains hairs. And the main function of this is to trap dust and foreign particles, like bacteria, which could get into your windpipe. The second function of the nasal passage is that it helps to warm and to moisten up the air. So that's why it's better to breathe through your nose if possible rather than through your mouth. Right, if you breathe through your mouth, you realize that it's easy to get your throat very dry or to get it infected. Okay, so let's move on. So air moves then from the nasal passages past the pharynx into the larynx, right, which is this structure here. Now, if you're very sharp, you will pick up that you've seen this word pharynx before, right? You saw it in the chapter on human nutrition and digestion, Right there we saw that the food that you eat goes into your mouth, and then from the mouth past the pharynx and then into the esophagus, right, which is this pink tube on the diagram here. So the air that we breathe and the food that we eat both pass through the pharynx. Is there any problem there? Can you think of any problem? If you can't think of it, then think of this question. Why do you choke? Now the reason why we choke is that sometimes food, instead of going down the esophagus, which is here, goes down the windpipe, which is here. So that's why the pharynx is very important. The pharynx ensures that food goes down the esophagus, but air goes down the windpipe. And there are several structures in the pharynx that help do that. The second question on this slide is, where does our voice come from? And the voice has very much to do with the larynx. Okay, if you go search on the internet, the larynx is the structure in your body where your vocal cords are found. Right, so that's part of your gas exchange system as well. So air passes through the larynx to help you project your voice. That's what gives you such a lovely voice, or a voice that sometimes you use wrongly, you talk too much in class. Okay, but that is your larynx, it gives you your voice. Alright, so what's next? Air now moves from the larynx down your windpipe, which we call the trachea. Now you know that you're a secondary school student when you can say trachea instead of windpipe. Who needs to say windpipe when you can say trachea? Now the trachea is very important, so we're going to spend a bit more time on it. So let's start by watching this interesting video. What you're about to see is a camera being inserted down someone's trachea. I'll take a look at what it looks like. So this is the larynx. This is the opening to the trachea. So the camera is going to go down, and soon we will see the trachea. Okay, now we're in the trachea. Now I want you to observe, what do you notice about the trachea? In particular, what do you observe about the walls of the trachea? Okay, so I'll pause it there. Here's where the trachea splits to go to both lungs. So what do you notice about the walls of the trachea? Did you notice that there were C-shaped rings in the wall of the trachea? Well, if you did, then good, you're being observant. If you didn't, then you can go back and watch the video again and see what I mean. So it turns out that the trachea has these C-shaped rings of cartilage over here. So the esophagus lies behind your trachea, and then the trachea, the front part of the trachea, has these C-shaped rings. In fact, if you feel your neck now and try to feel your windpipe, you can just about feel those C-shaped rings of cartilage. Okay, so here's a cross section of it instead. So here would be the side of my esophagus. Right, here would be the front of my neck. Front of neck. So this is the C-shaped ring of cartilage here. And it goes all the way down the trachea. So why is it there? Well, the trachea is supported by C-shaped rings of cartilage to ensure that it is always open, right? It's to kind of give it some support, right, to maintain the opening of the trachea. If those C-shaped rings weren't there, and then the trachea could just collapse inwards, and then you would find it very difficult to breathe indeed. Now, besides the C-shaped rings of cartilage, there's two other important adaptations that you need to know about the trachea. Now, on the inner walls of the trachea, and also the bronchus, which we'll see in the next slide, on the inner walls of the trachea, there are two types of cells. Okay, the first type of cell is the gland cell. Right, the gland cells, their function is to secrete mucus to trap dust particles and bacteria. So any dust particles and bacteria that go down the trachea will be trapped by the mucus secreted by these gland cells. So over here in this picture, the gland cell can be seen here. This is the gland cell, and it is secreting mucus represented by this pink substance in the diagram. You'll notice a second kind of cell here. What do you notice about it? It has these hair-like structures. So on the inner walls of the trachea, there's also ciliated cells. Ciliated cells that have cilia. Cilia meaning hair. They have cilia, and these cilia, their function is to sweep up the trapped particles and mucus. So they'll sweep up any trapped particles, sweep up any mucus to the pharynx, and from the pharynx there you are able to either cough it out of your mouth as phlegm, or swallow it down to your esophagus, into your digestive system. Okay, so you need to know these two types of cells that can be found in the inner walls of the trachea and the bronchus. Okay, so that's how the trachea is adapted for gases moving through it. So in the diagram, here is the ciliated cell, and here are the cilia. Okay, so what happens from the trachea? From the trachea will divide into two bronchi. Okay, bronchi is the plural, bronchus is singular. Okay, so each bronchus leads to a lung. Now each bronchus branches repeatedly into bronchioles. So here, these are your bronchioles. Okay, so each bronchus will divide into bronchioles, and the bronchioles themselves will keep dividing, keep branching out, and eventually the bronchioles will end in clusters of air sacs called alveoli. Right, so these are the air sacs here. Okay, so the bronchioles end in clusters of alveoli, clusters of air sacs. So here we see another adaptation of the gas exchange system. Right, there's a lot of branching, right, bronchus to bronchioles and then to alveoli. And this repeated branching increases the surface area for gas exchange, so that we can increase the efficiency of gases moving in and out of the body. Alright, so just a quick summary before we focus in on the alveoli. So how does air enter from the outside of our body? So from the nasal passage to the pharynx, to the larynx, to the trachea, the windpipe, to bronchi, singular bronchus, to bronchioles, which end in clusters of air sacs called the alveoli. Okay, for the rest of this video, we'll be focusing on the alveoli. Alright, so the alveoli are a very important part of this chapter. Often it comes out in the exam as well. So we're going to take a pause here, we'll take a short break, come back, and we'll talk a bit more about the function of the alveoli and how it's adapted for its function.